Good evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Am I audible? Am I visible? Give me a thumbs up for that. Perfect. Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Good evening. We'll wait for 2 minutes and then we'll begin. Good evening to all of you. Good evening. We'll wait for 2 minutes and then we'll begin. No, Achal. Good evening. Good evening. I'm good. I hope all of you are also fine. Okay. So the agenda for today is to understand mains-based current affairs, GS paper 1, GS paper 2. 5 topics we've chosen with art and culture, polity, and the other things in mind. So we'll try to understand the basic contours, why is it important for your preparation, generally why is it important in the larger context of GS paper 1 and 2, and the most important thing before we start is the fact that we have the what we call as the PTS examination, which is happening every Sunday, and this Sunday it is history. So do remember, this is part of your course. If you're a BYJU'S student, you get this for free. So 36 tests, sectional 19, 9 GS full length. So I hope that you are from time to time going to our offline centers and giving it. If not, it is also available online. Now, what are the 5 topics we have to cover for today? First is what is called the UDIS Plus report, the Unified District Information System of Education Plus report. It's an interesting report with regards to how the pandemic actually hit us. So basically, it's an important report because we need to see how the education sector has generally recovered from all of this. Thereafter, UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards for Cultural Heritage Conservation 2022. Then one topic from Yojana specifically taken from November 2022, which is sailing through history of aircraft carriers, and G20 summit and the Sinha committee on MG Narega efficacy. So interesting topics: one polity, one international relations, one is history, one is generally Yojana, and the other one is education sector, which falls under paper 1 and paper 2, both social issues generally. So good evening to all of you. As I said, I will be waiting 1 more minute for everybody to join in. Once they join in, we will begin the understanding for today. People are still joining in. I know you're coming out of the class itself. So yeah. Okay. Okay. So first is Unified District Information System on for Education Plus UDIS report. So as you know, as always, what I go about is that we will first discuss the basic contours, the basic concepts, and thereafter we'll go into the nitty-gritty of the topic and the report itself. So why are we discussing this topic for GS paper 1 and GS paper 2? Why is it so important? It's important for 3 very simple reasons. First is that, see, when the pandemic hit India, when we talk about COVID-19 pandemic, it very specifically impacted 3 sectors very badly, which is education, healthcare, and what we call as the general economic manufacturing, or what is called interstate and intrastate trade. But in that, education sector was one which was hit the most. And whilst all other sectors have able to come out or they have recovered, it is the education sector which somehow is showing a persistence in problems. And this is the problem, that very simply education sector is not coming out of the pandemic, and there are still a lot of indicators which are telling us that. And that is why the UDIS Plus report becomes important, started in 2018-19, just before the pandemic, and it checks 3-4 very important things. One is enrollment, thereafter dropout, how many schools are there, how many teachers are there, and the gendered ratio, And when we talk about the gendered ratio, school teachers, enrollment and dropout, all these things give us a very good understanding of how these things would be impacting or would be coming out of the pandemic in that sense. So when we talk about UDIS Plus report, we need to understand the basic concept of education sector basic indicators. Now, what the basic report tells us is, before going into the nitty-gritty of each and every topic and each and every aspect related to it, is that, see, enrollment is recovering, but it has still not recovered properly, because in basic indicators there is still in primary a major fallout, 21% last year, 10% this year, so cumulatively 31% there is a gap. Thereafter, other things related to what we call as dropout rate is equally high. Schools have been consolidated but have also closed, so the number has gone down. Teachers number has gone down. Gender ratio is good. And when it comes to primary, this is pre-primary I'm talking about, where there is 10% and 21%. In primary, there is for the first time a drop, but in primary and higher secondary together, there's a rise. So the data itself is indicating a lot of things, but the implications of that data is very, very important for your preparation generally. Very, very simply, how is the education sector recovering from the larger pandemic? So the first and the foremost point is, why are we discussing this topic? Because education sector was the one which was hit the most equally as the health sector. And whilst other sectors have recovered, this hasn't. And the indicators are showing that fatigue and that basic stagnation in coming out of the pandemic. And therefore, intervention is needed in that sense. It's a report, therefore it becomes important for prelims generally, but it's a mains based question because it's on the education sector, its implication generally with regards to that. So let's talk about the report. Is the basic concept clear, everyone? Basic concept clear? Okay. So first and foremost point for the prelims examination, report is submitted by the Ministry of Education, and it gives us what information regards to enrollment, dropout, rate of school students, number of teachers in schools, information and other infrastructural facilities such as toilets, electricity, buildings. And 2018-19 it was introduced to speed up the data entry, reduce errors, quality and verification. So it was very timely this data came through. Now, as generally concept, you don't have to learn any of this data. Obviously, you don't have to learn any of this data because it makes no sense. What you need to understand here is trend. What is the basic trend in the education sector? So let's try to understand that. Now, as I said, don't have to be scared by this data. Just have to understand the trend. In the pre-primary level, which is below first class, there has been a registered drop of 10% as compared to last year with regards to how many students enrolled into pre-primary, which is the first step itself. We have seen that only 94 lakh students have technically entered the schooling system with regards to 1.06 crores last year. And this is even better in a way because of the data which comes from last to last year, meaning compared to 2020-21 with 2019 data, there was a 21% enrollment decline, and this year it's only 10%. The basic point is, I don't care what this data generally is. What I care about is what it is indicating. It is indicating one thing very simply, that while schools are available, the enrollment at the pre-primary level, which is the stepping stone into this sector, there is a major dropout. There's a major dropout. And be it the 10% or be it the 21%, students are not going back to school. And this is something which is a little bit concerning because of the fact that these two data are related to the grassroots level reality. And when we talk about pre-primary, this is where a student enters into the system itself. Now, the same type of trend. So the first takeaway is at the pre-primary level, there is still a long way to recovery, which is that they are still not coming to the numbers which we saw in 2018 or in 2017. 2022, still there is a lot of lethargy in this data. Homeschooling is not the basic question or answer to that. There can't be a 10% change because of homeschooling. That makes no sense. Now, when we look at the primary and higher secondary level, we see a cascading effect. And you will see this year there was a cascading effect into the primary sector, and thereafter from 1 to 5 class, and thereafter 5th to what is called higher secondary level. The next year we will see a cascading effect, because the same students which went from 1 to 5 will then go from 5 and above. So enrollment in primary school, which is 1 to 5, saw a drop for the first time in generally since 2018, 2019, this data has come through, and it is marginally down, but it is down. However, overall the data has shown increase, which is 19 lakh increase to 25.257 crore students in schools. Now, as I said, you don't have to get flustered with this data generally. The basic point of the matter is, when we talk about the primary, when we talk about the pre-primary cascading effect can be seen in primary. That is why you see here, this is called the roll-on effect, because the students are getting less enrolled. For sure it will show in primary, and this primary data will automatically become higher secondary by the next 4 to 5 years. And this is not showing in higher secondary as of right now because of the data or the trend for the last 5 years. So the pandemic effect will show not in this UDIS plus report, but the next 2 or 3. The basic point, which is this is all India, obviously this is all India data. The point of the matter is that now the education sector can see the shock of the pandemic spread. This is called a shock wave. Very simply, cascading effect means roll-on effect, or when I hit something, it creates a chain reaction in that sense. So the cascading effect would mean that I have some change at pre-primary level, that will show in primary, that will show in higher secondary. So cascading, spillover, rippling effect, whatever you want to call it. Basically, the higher secondary is still insulated to that, but it will show change by the next 2 to 3 years. Now, this is the enrollment data. What is more concerning, till this point everybody is following me, right? They are, okay. Now, when we look at the data in much more nuanced way, there has been a decrease in the number of schools in India, which technically should be concerning, but it's because of the closure of private schools and the merger. Now, merger is good, but the closure of private schools says that during the pandemic, a lot of the schools closed up because they were not getting students or they were not getting revenue. So there is a comparative decrease in the number of schools. Same way, the number of teachers has gone down. 1.89 lakh, which is close to 2 lakh less teachers we have. This is more indicative, which means that basically with the closure of these private schools, the teachers are less, and in the pandemic, the teachers were not paid or were being pushed too much. So a lot of people left this profession. So now there is a problem. There is a problem at both the levels. At the enrollment level, there is no enrollment coming through. And on the above level, there is no teachers. So the ratio with regards to teacher to student changes, which automatically affects the quality of education. So if you look at these 3 data together, the data is a little bit dangerous, is indicative of much more systemic issues in the education sector than we actually see in the enrollment data. Then one of the most ironical parts of this story, that computer facilities only available in 44% of the schools, and 33% have internet access. So basically 11% of schools only have computers, no internet. Makes no sense. But for example, out of 100 schools in India, only 44 have a computer in this day and age. And imagine these schools were now working under the pandemic in online mode. But the saving grace is this is better than what we saw previously, which was 38.5% schools having computer, 22% having internet facilities. This is extremely sad to see, and this is extremely concerning. Why? Because at the end of the day, all this data is meaningless, because if today another shock comes in the form of a COVID-19 pandemic again, still 50% of our schools are not even ready to have a computer. They don't have the budget. If they have the computer, they don't have electricity. If they have electricity, they don't have internet. And 33%, meaning 33 out of 100 schools actually only have internet. And in this day and age, very simply, without internet access, a computer is useless. So I don't know what they're teaching on that. So the basic point of the matter is, if you look at this data very closely, that is why I'm doing it with you for GS paper 1 and 2, it is a very concerning story. It's a concerning story which shows a lot of dangerous concepts. Further, though the gender parity index is good because we have more girls with regards to boys in school, but this is again illusionary data, because when we look at higher education, the whole data gets skewed, which is that the girls leave the school, thereafter they don't go into higher education, whilst men go more for higher education. The point is very simple. What is the implication of this data? What is the implication of this data? That very simply, we have a problem. And the problem is that enrollment is still down. Teachers are still down. And 33% of schools have internet. And close to 60% of schools don't have computer. Now you tell me how this data fares with any other country and fares with what we call today as a developing country, a developed country, where 11% of schools have a computer but no internet. So this data UDIS plus is always eye-opening in that regard. And it is even more dangerous that after everything opening up, lockdowns gone, it has been close to 1.5 years. But still the education sector is showing a lot of what we call as stagnation, a lot of after effects and hangover of the pandemic. And the government as of right now is not very concerned about this. They are not very concerned about this because there is no very basic technical intervention as of right now planned for it. So the basic point which you need to understand here is that the irony of this whole point is, we talk about the digital age, but the schools are not in the digital age itself. They are still caught up in that old style education. And if today, for example, another pandemic hits, I don't really think, or we actually, after looking at this data, think that the education sector is still ready. And our policymakers are still not actually seeing this data with a critical eye or a concerning eye, because at the end of the day, if this report is not indicating something, it is indicating one thing for sure, which is that education sector is still not ready to take a shock again. So 3 things we take away from here. Enrollments are down, not good. Teachers are leaving, which is again not good for the general sector itself. You have to incentivize it. And the basic point is, we still are not in the digital age. We still are caught up in that old style education. And having a computer without internet is a futile exercise. And most of the schools don't even have an internet, don't have a computer. So is it government's problem? Yes, it is. Is it generally a concerning aspect? Yes, it is. Now, Way forward is very simply government intervention, because most of these schools are government schools. But now the point is that if we were not able to do it 1.5 years after, then there's a question of political will. That is there actually a political will to change something, right? So is this basic topic clear? Okay. Now, if it is clear, we can take a question. What type of question can come? The shockwaves of the pandemic still persist in the education sector of India. Elucidate. And this is how you use this data. Very simply, introduction, body, conclusion. In the introduction, very simply, you will talk about how the pandemic hit the education sector the most because of physical access to schools going away. Now, in the body, you talk about the shock waves of the pandemic, and the shock waves of the pandemic is enrollment data still down, teacher data still down, primary shows decline, pre-primary is showing decline, and what is even more interesting is that 11% of schools have a computer, don't have an internet, and only 33% of schools in India actually have an internet-based computer system. And therefore, concluding by saying that though there are shock waves, if another shock comes in the form of another lockdown or another virus, education sector as of right now is still not ready. Still not ready. So this is the moral of the story here, that nobody is ready, we aren't ready, education sector has not even come out, and there is nothing. So the way forward here is very simply governmental intervention, political will. They need to change it. We have the capacity to put a computer in each and every, if every village has been electrified as per the rural electrification concept, what is the issue of not having in that regard schools which have computers with internet? So it's rather basically a whole story with regards to will. Does the political will of the states, because the center and state has to come together, education is a state subject, so there has to be a much more stronger intervention of the state. Do they have the money to do it? These are questions which are linked to the larger concept of cooperative and competitive federalism. Right? Make sense? Right? Okay. So let's take some questions. So, sir, why we care about education of children if neither it is providing work or it is reducing crime in society? So then there's no point in studying anything only. Let's leave everything. This is a nihilistic question. This question tells me that you are questioning your own existence. That is not a good thing. That what's the point of educating the children if they don't provide work, reducing crime in society? This type of approach doesn't work. Second, okay. So don't take that kind of an approach in with regards to what you are doing, because doesn't work like that. Okay. Maybe most students absolutely clear. Okay, so there's no issue. I think we can go on further, right? Okay, right. Now something related to art and culture, which is UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards for Cultural Heritage Conservation 2022. This is an interesting topic, very recent also, but very relevant for GS paper 2, or rather 1, GS paper 1. And the point of the matter is, in this Telangana, has been very fortunate in getting 2 basic awards. But let's try to understand this concept or this topic generally. So when we talk about the UNESCO Asia Pacific Award for Cultural Heritage and Conservation, the point is very simple, which is that in this day and age, there is a need to conserve our heritage with regards to climate change, political, economic turmoil, what is happening in Afghanistan, for example, Iran, very beautiful cultures, very rich heritage, but destroyed by different terrorist activity. So what this UNESCO Asia Pacific Award for Cultural Heritage Conservation does is it creates an incentive regime. It creates an incentive regime in which each and every state which is trying to conserve its heritage is able to do that. Now, we have, or we are very fortunate in that sense, to have a very important and very well preserved heritage till this point with regards to certain periods. But it's generally urbanization, development generally, which is in turn leading to destruction. So India getting recognition within the Cultural Heritage Conservation Awards is important, equally important, and equally encouraging. So the point is, in the examination, they can ask you the purpose of this award. What is the purpose of the award? And the purpose of the award is to make sure that you reward good behavior with regards to heritage conservation and incentivize conservation of art and culture. So this is a very important point you need to understand with regards to the purpose of this, which is that we don't have to complicate it. We just have to create a regime which is important. Vishnu, stop putting those questions in the sheet. Now, very simply, the point of the matter is, let's see for what have we actually got this award. Everybody is following the basic concept. That why is this important? Okay. Now, when we talk about this award, happened recently in Bangkok, the last meeting of it. And what it does is that it tries to recognize exemplary efforts of individuals and organizations to restore and conserve structures, place and property cultural heritage into the region. And basically what they're trying to do is they're recognizing efforts to conserve. And this is the uniqueness of this award. And it also encourages the property owners, basically the nation states, to undertake conservation projects either independently or as public-private partnership. You would have heard about one trust which is called the Aga Khan Trust. And it today works to make sure that it's an annual event. And very simply, Aga Khan Trust has been doing a lot of good work with regards to Humayun's tomb. And the two that we are discussing, one of them was under Aga Khan only. Now, this is the basic part which you need to know for the mains examination. But now, because the awards were given to two cultural sites, they become relevant for the prelims examination and mains examination both. So, the award of distinction was given in one case and the award of merit was given in the second case. This is when the projects demonstrate outstanding achievement in all criteria and that have significant impact on national and regional levels. On the other hand, award of merit recognizes projects that demonstrate superior achievement in all criteria. So basically, it's about how they come together. The two places which were in the news in that sense are, first is the what we call as the Baulis. I'll tell you what is a Bauli of the Qutub Shahi tomb complex in Hyderabad, which is within the Golconda Fort itself. And the second was given to the Domakanda or Domakonda Fort. Now, Now, what the criteria is very simple. Has their cultural restoration added to the larger concept of the heritage conservation, or has there been a very conscious attempt in saving these sites, So what you need to understand here first is what is a Bauli. See, there are wells, you put a bucket into the water and you take the water out of it. This is a well. So basically, what is the water level, A or B? Where is the water level, A or B? Very good, A. Perfect. Now, if it is at A, there are two ways to actually do this. You can either go vertically down, or you can make a step well, which is, if the water is at A, I will very gradationally cut the soil in such a way that I can go down to the water level itself. This is called a Bauli, or this is called a step well. Step wells are or were very, very important in the medieval period, and they were used quite a lot with regards to how water access was there. Very deep, very beautifully made, part of Solanki culture, Solanki art and culture, or the Solanki style itself, which is step wells. But the step wells which were made in the Qutub Shahi period, I'll tell you what that period is, were even more interesting because they were made in water scarcity zones. So they were firstly very deep, but they were also linked to a larger water management system in that area with regards to rainwater harvesting, and the orchards and the other bags and gardens which were next to it were all linked to that Bauli itself. So the first award has technically come to the Qutub Shahi tomb complex, which is in the famous Golconda Fort in Hyderabad. And this is the Bauli in question. You can see how the stairs go down, and when they go down, they technically go to the water level. And they have proper different forms of corridors made so as to make sure that it was easy to access the water. And there were a lot of gardens and bags which were linked to it. So the Aga Khan Trust has put in a lot of money with regards to how Government of India, ASI and Aga Khan Trust have come together. And within the Qutub Shahi period, which is technically there were two, if you remember the basic story of medieval India. Now after Muhammad bin Tughlaq, you have Vijayanagara and Bahmani. Bahmani kingdom breaks up into 5 Deccani Sultanates: Bijapur, Berar, Ahmednagar, Golconda and Bidar. And out of that, the most important, the Golconda sector, was under the Qutub Shahis, and they ruled between 1518 and 1687, basically from the endish period of the Delhi Sultanate to the last period of Shah Jahan. And very simply, they created very, very elaborate step wells, Baulis, created initially to irrigate the adjacent orchards, but thereafter became very, very interesting and important with the larger landscape of this area. Now, Aga Khan Trust is a private NGO which works to conserve different form of heritages. Humayun's tomb was restored by it only. This is also under Aga Khan only. Now, the second is called the Domakonda Fort. This is interesting because of the way the fort itself is made. Because it's called a 2-story fort, and a 2-story fort is very important because initially the whole parapet used to be only one level, meaning you could only go till this level. But there are 2 different levels in this fort. The arch itself is very, very beautifully made, and inside there is a very modern looking Mughal modern mixture bungalow, sometimes also called as the glass house, because it has a very beautiful fountain. And generally the architecture which was used was a mixture of the coming of the Portuguese influence along with the Mughal influence. And this fort was again built in the 18th century, double storied, wooden door entrance along with great stucco work. Stucco is a type of plaster of Paris, and these two have been conserved very, very beautifully. Now, as I said, this Kamareddy district, yes, as I said, this all is irrelevant to you except for their context. Why is the award important? Because it incentivizes what we call as heritage conservation. Second is, now for the prelims examination, you need to know basic information about these two, because they both have been recognized by UNESCO. Therefore, it becomes interesting and important in how things. Domakonda is also Telangana. Both are Telangana. This is the Kamareddy district of Telangana. That is Hyderabad. So basically, why are we doing this topic? We are doing this topic because for prelims and mains, two things will become very interesting. First, you now need to know the Qutub Shahi tomb complex. And second, you need to know the Domakonda fort. This is for the prelims part, because it should not come as a shock that they've asked you that. And second is the award itself. This award is important because this award gives and incentivizes conservation of art and culture. Make sense, everybody? Okay, perfect. Now, let's look at a question which can come from this area. The UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards for Cultural Heritage Conservation creates an incentive and recognition regime which is important in the present context. Comment. What do you mean by this? Very simply, you need to talk about the significance. So here again, introduction, body, conclusion. And very simply, intro, body, conclusion means that you will talk about the vulnerabilities to art and culture, heritage generally today. Once you've done that, you move to body. When you move to body, you are going to talk about how UNESCO Asia Pacific Award is for heritage conservation. That is the basic point. And it is rewarding and recognizing all forms of conservation efforts, which in turn creates a regime, a precedence, a environment in which heritage conservation, heritage take care, and taking care of art and culture becomes extremely rewarding and basically comes on the map. It gets the light which it needs. And conclude very simply by saying that, because it's comment, you need to give your perspective, that basically this is a very important award. It creates an incentive based regime. However, that is not enough. We need to go further, create awareness. If UNESCO is doing it, national awards need to exist. So you talk about the way forward generally with what can be done further in the larger context. Make sense? Why we are doing it? What is the concept here? Okay, perfect. So let's take some questions. Okay. Yes. Regime means the concept. I'm sorry. Regime means a concept. Regime means a concept, which is that it creates a discourse, a concept in which everybody knows that if they are going to conserve, they will get recognition. See, the point is, art and culture is not always on the highest list. Is not always on the highest list. So it is important that if nation states are going to get a lot of recognition, it becomes like a competition, and therefore it creates the context in which all around the world different forms of, in this project itself, 27 countries, 256 different things have been recognized, which creates a good regime in which states want to compete. It becomes like an Olympics of conservation of art and culture, right? Okay. You don't need to know anything further for Domakonda or for Qutub Shahi, just their period, Okay. Can we move forward if this is clear? No issues? Okay, perfect. Now this is also clear. Let's move to the next, which is sailing through history of aircraft carriers. We've taken this question very straightforward, very straightforward from Yojana November 2022 edition. It was technically on maritime uh, discourse port development, but there was a very interesting article with regards to our aircraft carriers. And for the purpose of the examination, what is the role of an aircraft carrier and what it is? Both are very important concepts. So when we talk about aircraft carriers, they are a game changer. So you need to understand there are different types of ships which the Navy uses. So you have something called a frigate, something called a destroyer. You will have an aircraft carrier. It's the easiest because it has its own name, is much more straightforward. But for example, a difference between, I'm not stuck, everything's fine. When we talk about frigate and destroyer, the difference is speed. For example, frigate is going to be much faster, but it will not have a lot of weapons. It will be maybe more stealthier, but very less weapons. Destroyer is much bigger, is slower, but has very big ammunition on it. Aircraft carrier has a very specific purpose, which with regards to, it is a multi-role ship, very big ship, can carry helicopters, and it's technically a sailing airport. It's a sailing airport. And the point is, frigate is the type of ship. This is a type of ship. Frigate ship, destroyer ship. There's no meaning for frigate. What the meaning of a name? Frigate, destroyer, destroyer. Same type, aircraft carrier. So it's basically a sailing airport. It can't be. How is it a sailing airport? It's very easy. Basically, the ship itself has a runway, and on the runway itself, you have a deck, and they can have different types of aircrafts here, which can take off and land on it. So it is a sailing ship. It's a sailing ship, and it's a sailing airport in that regard. That is the easiest way to say what basically an aircraft carrier is. Now, aircraft carriers are game changers. Why? Because aircraft carriers don't have 100, 200. They have 2,000, 4,000 employees or sailors on it. And it is multi-role in the sense that India can make sure that the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal is, coastal areas can be secured better. But when we go into the Indian Ocean, India can't carry everything on destroyers and frigates which have no, what are called blue water capacity, which is to go very deep into the ocean. So basically these big ships, these aircraft carriers give a strategic edge over everything else because they are a sailing navy base in a way. So aircraft carriers in that sense is very simple. Is a very important multi-role concept. What is an aircraft? You tell me what is an aircraft. What is an aircraft? Helicopter is not an aircraft. Aircraft is a plane, the one which you take to go to some place. But what are called fighter jets, Rafale, MiG-29, MiG-31, these are called aircrafts. So very simply, the aircraft carriers, I'll show you images, don't worry. They are important. Can we agree to this much? They are very important. Okay. Now, if we can agree to that, we can then go further because we have a very long history of different forms of, aircraft carriers which we'll be using. And very simply, one second, I'm just looking through your comments to see what are the basic comments which are coming through. Okay. Now, so aircraft carriers are very very, very powerful and strong weapons of very powerful in that regard, very relevant in that sense. Aircraft carriers offer a wide range of strategic benefits: surveillance, air defense, airborne early warning systems, protection of sea lines, and submarine, anti-submarine warfare. All are the principal functions. So what does an aircraft carrier look like? It looks like this. Basically, on the deck, it has aircrafts and helicopters, and basically it has a runway through which they can take off. But India technically has a lot of different precedents, or we have not ever created, except for our latest. We've always borrowed our aircraft carriers. So the first aircraft carrier which India ever had is called INS Vikrant. Now remember one thing, this Vikrant has been decommissioned. And now another Vikrant is being used, so there are two Vikrants. So don't act in a way confused. How can be there two Vikrants? This Vikrant has been decommissioned. So it was first launched as a British ship, which is called the HMIS Hercules, and later India purchased it from Britain in 1957. In 1961, it was commissioned in the Avatar as we know it for Indian purposes, and it was given to a very important captain, Captain Pritam Singh Mahindru, and he was the one who was very, very important in the sense that he was the game changer. And when you look at it, decommissioned means that there is, once you use a car, it becomes useless. Once it becomes useless, you give it away. Same way, every ship has a life. Once the life is over, decommissioned. So now, soon after his commissioning means adding, Vikrant saw the what is called operation, which was in Goa, so liberation of Goa in 1961 from the Portuguese. It played a very important role, and this has a very important role to play in all of the major significant moments. Thereafter, in 1971 Bangladesh war, it also played a very important role in making sure that East Pakistan was fully blockaded so that the Pakistanis could not send any reinforcement. And the basic point is INS Vikrant became the game changer in the Bay of Bengal, and the surrender of the 96,000 troops of Pakistan, because they had no reinforcement and supplies, was because of this ship making sure that Bay of Bengal could not be used by the Pakistanis with regards to a way of reinforcing their troops in Bangladesh or East Pakistan in that sense. So this is the first story. This is the British story of the, and ironically the first two carriers we have, both were British only. Then comes INS Virat. This is what is called the HMS Hermes in 1959. India needed another second aircraft carrier. So HMS Hermes was taken by India from the British in 1986, and it was renamed as INS Virat. And in 1987, we have our second important aircraft carrier. It was extremely important during the LTTE problems and what was happening in Sri Lanka. So when the peacekeeping operations in Sri Lanka, LTTE, Lankan Tamil Tigers, and the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord of 1986 broke down, it made sure that the Gulf of Mannar was very, very protected in that sense. And it also played a pivotal role in Operation Parakram, which was after the 2001 Parliament attack in that sense. And it also played a very important role in the 1999 Kargil war, which is to blockade what we call as the Arabian Sea sector and very simply make sure that Operation Vijay was successful. So as I said, these ships, INS means Indian Navy ship, is very, very important. Very, very important because they are, as I said, naval bases on water and they can move around and they have a lot of firepower in that sense. So this is the first, this is the second. Everybody following me? You don't have to learn the details that I'm telling you their role basically. Okay. Now, the third and the most interesting has been Vikramaditya. Vikramaditya was not taken from Britain but rather from Russia, and it was a Kiev class ship purchased by India and then retrofitted to make it for Indian purposes. Commissioned in 2013 in Russia, and in 2014 the Prime Minister formally inducted it into the Indian Navy. It's not seen a lot of action, which is good because which means there's no war. but it has the basic, it has a distinction of being the first aircraft carrier to have the State Bank of India ATM. So it is the first naval ship in India which has an ATM on board, and it also has a new type of technology. What do you mean by that? STOBAR it's called. So there are two ways in which you launch over an aircraft carrier. One, it's called catapult system, CATSA, and this is called the STOBAR system. So what is the difference? See, if you will look at it, for 1 second, if you will look at it, these two have straight decks, this also and this also, whilst this has this type of curve. When an aircraft carrier has a runway which is curved above, it's called STOBAR, short takeoff but arrested landing. Basically, it does not have the concept of a catapult which takes the potential energy and just shoots the aircraft into the ship. Rather, this curve allows the aircraft to go straight above rather than going straight. So STOBAR, you don't need to know what it is, but if you look at any aircraft carrier which has this thing above, it is curved above, it is a STOBAR rather than the CATSA, what is called the catapult system. The same is in the latest, which is INS Vikrant. This is important because 76% of all the equipment which is there on this ship is actually indigenous. So the 45,000 tons of equipment which is there with regards to the largest naval ship designed in India and created in India, 76% of it was commissioned in India itself. Again, as you can see, it has a curved deck, which means that it will have STOBAR, and it has the capability to have 30 aircrafts, Kamov helicopters, MH7, what is called 660R multi-role helicopters, and it can even support our LCA, which is Tejas. So very simply, this is very, very significant because now India can produce 80% of all its equipment with regards to the aircraft carriers in India. If you look at the basic history, you can see British, Russian, and now indigenous. So that was India is moving in the right direction. But when we talk about the if you wait with China or, for example, the the Americans, it's not that good a story, which is that China has close to 16 aircraft carriers. Right now, we have two major ones. What we have are what are called diesel. Basically, they don't have the propulsion system is diesel. So they have to stop after a time. Basically, 3 to 4 months they can stay at sea. But after that, they would have to come back. Whilst China and what we call as the US have what are called nuclear aircraft carriers. Basically, they can stay at sea for 4 years without even touching land. That is the capability of those aircraft carriers. That is why a lot of American aircraft carriers are in the South China Sea, because they don't need fuel. Refueling is not needed. Therefore, India has a long way to go, but having an aircraft carrier in itself is very, very important, and it plays as a deterrent. It plays as an important role, or basically it plays a good role in the larger story of naval history, naval politics, and multi-role ships. Make sense? Okay. So let's look at a question. India's dominance and presence in the Indian Ocean is inherently linked to the naval capabilities, especially our aircraft carriers. So discuss. Very interesting question. So you have to understand, it's an open-ended question. It can have different type of answers. India's dominance presence in the Indian Ocean world is inherently linked to naval capabilities, especially aircraft carriers. So you need to talk about the importance of Indian Ocean world. That why is that the whole Indian Ocean sector is important for India's dominance. The presence of China is a problem. So you bring in international relations. Thereafter, in the body, you need to talk about that we have different types of ships. However, it is the aircraft carrier which acts as the most important deterrent. Deterrent means that it is which makes everybody rethink any form of action, and multi-role aircraft carriers are technically naval bases on water and an airport on water itself, which allows India to respond in multiple ways, and anti-submarine activities and larger blue water capabilities of India is very, very enhanced with aircraft carriers. And conclude by very simply saying that Indian Ocean world is a area of contention. It's an area of a lot of problematic aspects. Therefore, India's presence in it, naval wise, needs more presence in the form of aircraft carriers. India needs at least 10 to 11 aircraft carriers to really be a dominant force in the Indian Ocean. Make sense? India has known it only has Arihant, INS Arihant, which is a submarine, which is nuclear submarine. We don't have aircraft carriers which are nuclear. Okay. What does UPSC basically want to know about ships and aircraft carriers? Nothing. Then UPSC wants you to know the significance of it. They don't want you to know what is a frigate, what is a destroyer, what is Chennai class, what is Kolkata class. They don't care about that. What they really care about is, do you understand the importance of it? That's it. Okay. How many working we have? Technically, we have 2 aircraft carriers, Vikramaditya and Vikrant. You can discuss the importance of the Indian Ocean world for sure. Come on, come on. Afrin, the importance of all of them, Vikrant, Virat, Vikramaditya, are written in the PPT. That is not an issue. You don't have to learn each and everything, obviously. Use of ATM in sea, basically nothing. It was a symbolic concept. Vikrant, I said 76% indigenous. So does it make it totally indigenous? Catapult system is when the aircraft is tied to a very big type of what we call as rope. It has tension, potential energy. Then this moves away. It goes fastly. It goes very fast and then takes off. It gives speed very quickly. That's called the catapult system. Stobar does not have the catapult system. It has this curve which can increase the surface area to actually take off. Okay. Can we move forward, everyone? This is okay. You understand the concept. You understand the basic significance here. Perfect. 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 Okay. Now comes international relations G20 summit. Now G20 is interesting. It's interesting because of the context in which it is happening, which is Russia-Ukraine, which is the energy crisis, rising inflation, impending recession, what is happening in China and protests, Xi Jinping's third term. Very simply, there's a major crisis in the world because of this. Russia-Ukraine crisis created the context in which now energy, which is fuel prices have risen up to 10-year high, which in turn means that there is inflation. And when there is inflation, as we know, over a period of time, consumption starts to fall with high inflation because people's money has no real worth. So now what we are seeing is that this type of energy inflation could lead to slowing down of the economies, and the IMF, be it Moody or the World Bank, have said that there's a major deflationary trend. The major concept of recession can come in 2023 itself. And China itself is reeling under what we call a zero China, zero COVID policy, which is lockdown after lockdown after lockdown. Xi Jinping is changing the Communist Party itself. And in all of this comes G20. G20 in that sense, G20 in that sense is a important body because it brings in a lot of developing and developed countries together. But very simply, am I audible? Yes, I am, right? Okay. So some of you were writing, I'm not. Nivesh, just refresh. So as I said, the point of the matter is that this G20 was not very standard. Firstly, it was the first G20 after proper COVID lockdowns, and this was the first physical G20. And a lot of things are happening in the world. So now let's try to understand what are the G20 countries. I'm coming to that. And it was, as you said, one of the most unproductive. No real thing came out of this G20. See, there are 5-6 important concepts. G7, which is France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, USA, and Canada. Russia used to be a part of it since the what we call as the invasion of the Crimean Peninsula. Russia was removed so the G8 became the G7. But the G20 is important because G20 has Brazil, India, the Indonesian, the Chinese, and South Africa together. So very simply, technically, the BRICS nations come together. But the presence of India and China in the same forum is very interesting and very important. It also links up the Quad members. So you have India, Australia, United States, and Japan together. So the Quad also comes within it. So basically, G20 is one of the ones which is the biggest forum, and it brings in a lot of different countries together in a very fruitful way. So it is being held in Bali. Indonesia was the president. Motto was recover together, recover stronger. This is relevant for PCS level examination. What was the motto? But what is very important is the fact that India will now be the president, or the presidency of G20 is now with India. So for year 2023, India is the president. So G means group. It means group 20, group 20, group 8, group 7. It's a multilateral institution. But in the context of what is happening in the world as of right now, multilateral institutions are becoming very quickly useless. Very quickly useless, redundant, and their place in generally how international relations is working has been very simply become diluted, because the world now is moving towards bilateralism, which is country to country, and two countries coming together figuring out an FATA, which is the free trade agreement, or having customs union. Multilateral institutions are very simply, multilateralism means multi, use your logic, multilateralism. Multi means multiple, lateralism means different paths. So basically, multiple countries coming together, multilateralism. Bi means two, bilateralism. Unilateral, one lateral, one country. So by what we call as bilateralism or multilateralism, very simply is becoming redundant in the world generally, because these big forums don't produce nothing or really significant. You will see this was also very simply useless. This G20 was all show, nothing really happened, no stern things were taken, and very simply, because Russia was there, no real declaration, nothing. It was a big holiday in Bali, and therefore everybody enjoyed themselves, but nothing really came out, which again proves to us that it is becoming obsolete. Multilateral big institutions don't really produce anything. So see, let's try to understand what were the takeaways. First thing which they said was digital transformation, digital literacy, which is that they argued that in this world, it is important for everybody to be digitally literate. But ironically, if you look at the data which we have, 33% of the schools in India only have internet. So we don't know how are we going to technically become what we call as digitally literate fully. But sustainable development goals via digital means, basically all SDGs can be helped via digital technology. We need to talk about digital literacy, which is that everybody knows how to use basic data, basic machines, basic devices. And there needs to be a focus on women, girls, and vulnerable groups of the society generally all across the world. But again, these are big, big things. These are big, big things having no real meaning. Having no real meaning. Climate change, again, reaffirmed the concept of Paris Climate Agreement that we will not let that 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1.5 degrees Celsius go above. But again, that is also all a sham. Everybody says that we are working to make sure that we don't heat the earth. Countries which come under G20, either you are closing your eyes or I was not very clear when I was showing you this. These are the countries which come under G20. So what is the issue? A lot of you are asking the same question again and again. This is G7, I'm showing you G8, I'm showing you G20, I'm showing you. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then add these 12. Becomes G20. CSAT? So now you tell me, how many candidates would meet in G20, group of 20? This is a question which has come to me. You tell me, how many? The name itself is G20. So why are you writing 19? Please. It says G20. So you will ask me G8, how many people are there? G7, how many countries are there? So 20, group 20. Okay. So are we all on the same page here? Because some of you are asking standard questions which are implied in the name itself. Okay. This. Now a lot of you are saying European Union is there. So it is 19 plus 1. So then you add all the European Union countries also into this. Complicate it as much as you can. Make it in such a way that you can never learn the G20 countries. Add all the EU also. Why are we saying 20? Let's make it 57. When I am telling you it's only 20, what is the point of me telling me that there is European Union in it? I know there is European Union in it. So EU, add all the EU countries also. Let's make it as complicated as possible so that we can never learn G20. Agreed? Right? Okay. Now, very simply, keep it simple for the examination. When it says G20, it has to be G20. So, why complicate your understanding, which a lot of you are doing? So, don't do that. Don't do that. UPSC does not want you to be Sherlock Holmes. Basic logic works. If it is G20, it has to be 20. I don't care if you add the countries then. Okay. Amit, then how it is? You tell me. How? Okay. Digital transformation, digital literacy, first thing. Second is reaffirmation to what we call as climate change. Again, a hollow lie, a hollow concept itself. Thereafter, food security. Now, here comes an interesting concept and a very important concept which you need to know, which is Black Sea Grains Project. Now, Black Seas Grains Project is very, very significant because everybody should know that Ukraine is one of the largest exporters of grains. When it comes to wheat, maize, largest exporter. Now, if there's a Russia-Ukraine war, what actually happened was that the grain supply into the world was very drastically hit. So food prices started to go up in the world, and generally you see the food inflation in India or generally across the world is because of this concept of Russia-Ukraine. So now what happened was that Russia itself started to realize, which was importing a lot of Ukrainian grains, that there needs to be a better way to handle this. And this is something which can come in the examination very, very clearly, which is that what is the Black Sea Grains Project? And the Black Sea Grains Project is very, very significant because it's an agreement between Russia, Ukraine, UN, and the Turkish or Turkey. These four have come together to make sure that the Ukraine grain supply is not hit because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Close to 9.8 million tons of grains have been allowed to be exported out of the war sectors, in which Russia is also cooperating, but Turkey is the mediator. Why is Turkey the mediator here? Why is that Turkey is involved in this? If it's the Black Sea, why Turkey? Very good, Shreya. Passage. What is the name of that strait? What is it called? Not Bosphorus, Dardanelles. Because because Turkey technically controls the Dardanelles Strait, with which you can come out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean Sea. Turkey is very, very important. So very simply, Dardanelles Strait means that Turkey had to be on board. And Turkey is a little bit pro-Russia. Therefore, it was very, very important that the UN could mediate this. So the G20 showed that if it comes to food security or food generally, food grains itself, the grains and the food inflation has now urged these warring parties to come together and Turkey to come together to work something out. This is the most important thing which was mentioned within the G20, and this showed that technically if we come together we can work out things. But the problem here is that this is only a 120-day arrangement. Only 120 days. Which is that after 120 days, Russia will not hold up its side of the story. And this is the sad part. So remember, four things are very, very clear here. First is G20 is becoming redundant. We can generally see that. Second is the fact that the different forms of things which have come through are all more or less useless. Digital transformation, climate change, all standard things which everybody is saying. But they mentioned something which showed a little bit of cooperation, and that cooperation was in food security. Now, Black Seas Grains Project, remember, is 120 days arrangement between four countries, Turkey, UN, Ukraine and Russia, in order to allow Ukraine, the largest exporter of grains, to export grains via the Dardanelles Strait and the Black Sea into the EU markets and the African and Asian markets. So this means that Russia is conscious of the understanding, but let's see what happens after these 120 days. Till this point, everybody is with me? No issues? Okay. Now, the other thing which was in question was the global market, interest rates, volatility of the market. And very simply, why are they talking about interest rates and recession? See, inflation at this point of time is at the highest. Be it India is reeling, but the effect is not that much, but it is still there. When inflations go up, what does it mean? What does inflation means in the money, in the in the economy, money supply is less or more? More. So what the different types of central banks try to do is try to curb it by increasing the interest rates. They increase the repo rate, the reverse repo. What they do is that they increase the interest rates so that people stop borrowing. And when people stop borrowing or technically are starved of credit, that could technically reduce money supply. But this is a very dangerous slippery slope. I'll tell you why. Because once money supply is stopped in an economy, it can in turn lead to consumption to fall down. And more than that, demand would very sharply fall down. And when demand falls, it means that there is a chance of recession. So all countries as of right now, are talking about this, which is that inflation is there and that fuel inflation is coming from Russia, Ukraine. So everything is linked to Russia, Ukraine. That Russia, Ukraine is in turn leading to inflation, in turn leading to interest rates going up. You would have seen it with regards to how the RBI has increased in the past 3 of its meetings, the MPC. Every time it's trying to increase the repo rate or all the policy rates. This is going to reduce money supply, but with money supply, this problem is going to be consumption and demand, therefore recession. So this is a dangerous problem. This is a problematic aspect of this story, which is that all countries are bracing for recession. And remember one thing, Shubham, if demand, I have written demand here. So it is demand pull inflation or cost push? Tell me. Demand pull, cost push. I have written demand here. Obviously demand. This one is based on too much money being in the market. Inflation means that the government is going to respond in the same way. The basic point of the matter is, see, inflation is a bad thing. But recession is even worse. Because coming out of a recession is even more problematic. Why? Because recessions, what they do is, they can only be revived by public spending. And public spending means the government needs to spend. And as of right now, governments are also starved of credit. And with all countries all across the world trying to increase their interest rates means that credit is not available very quickly. And with the exchange rate the way it is, all countries as of right now are in a very dangerous situation. There is depreciation of rupee. India itself, it's seeing the 81 rupees, 81.5, it was 81.90 it was today. It's touching till 83. Our forex reserves are going down. The problem is inflation is not under control. Russia, Ukraine is not going anywhere. So in turn, the only way they do it, they make the cash trap, or what we call as reduce the money supply, so that the excess money which is there in the economy is flushed out. But the basic cascading effect of this is going to be recession. So very simply, the focus on global economy is something which everybody is talking about. Are you getting my point here? Cost of living crisis is the same thing, Manisha, because if inflation is there, cost of living goes up. Okay. Now, very simply related to this is condemning Russia's aggression. Aggression in UK, the cascading effect on energy prices, energy inflation. But Russia has already seen one thing, which is that, or has proved one thing, which is that economic blockades don't work in this day and age. And the more the EU is trying to go for economic blockade, the more it is backfiring on the EU itself. Because EU is reeling under an energy crisis. And because the Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, the gas which was coming from Russia is the lifeline of Germany and a lot of different countries, close to 60 to 70% of their energy comes from Russia. means that there is no real end in the light of this tunnel, and it's very, very concerning how things are going about. So we all need to brace for a recession next year, and the way it is moving is in that sense itself. So you understand the context and the takeaways out of G20, what discussion they had. That is clear? Okay. Now, what are the challenges for anything which comes further? Which is geopolitical rifts are still there. China, Taiwan, China, India, Russia, Ukraine, Russia, USA, China. If you look at it, Japan, China, Canada, China, Australia, China. If you look at it, there is a lot of issues everywhere. There is ironically China everywhere. The problem is that India, China is there. India, Russia is a little bit strained. India, Pakistan is there. The point is not this. The point is geopolitics at this point of time is very fragile. It is extremely fragile at this point of time. And will the G20 really survive? Or it makes... The point is G20 is now become like a holiday. That is the biggest issue. There's nothing concrete happening. The next challenge which all of these economies have is that the slowdown of the major economies which has happened, because 0.6% growth is being projected for USA, 1.2% growth is being projected for China. Generally, world economy 0.3% growth is being projected. From what we have, 3%, 2%. So when we were technically, the pandemic hit all of the countries quite a lot. World GDP went down, world growth rate went down. But now this Russia-Ukraine crisis and its cascading effects, its domino effect, whatever you want to call it, rippling effects, has led to now slowdown of the major economies. And if all major economies slow down, India's export is going to slow down. India's export is going to slow down, the Indian economy is going to slow down. And basically, we were going for 6 to 7%, maximum 7 to 7.5%. Now, everybody is more or less said that we'll be between 6 to 6.5%. So if you look at it, all of this G20 right now is a mess. G20 in itself cannot resolve anything, and everybody is reeling under a lot of different issues. Expected recession, as I said, everybody is bracing for it. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has shown that the world at this point of time is very, very fragile. NATO countries are not really having a response to Russia's problems. And inflation means that the industry, the winter which is coming in Europe is going to be a very, very chilly one, a very, very hard one in that sense. So very simply, G20, if it really has a relevance today, is a question. But G20 gave us an opportunity to understand everything connected together. Russia, Ukraine, in turn leading to rising inflation, in turn leading to recession, in turn leading to global crisis. Make sense, everybody? How we were able to link everything together? Okay. Now, mains question. In the context of the current geopolitical environment, do multilateral institutions still hold relevance? It's an interesting question. So, introduction, body, conclusion. In the introduction, you have to talk about the present geopolitical environment. So, Russia, Ukraine, China's imperialistic policies, Africa crisis, debt imperialism, debt politics of China, USA under unstable relationship. In the body, you can talk about the effects of this, which is rising inflation, the concept of recession. And in that context, you can talk about the G20, that how when the G20 is coming through, and it is coming through, when it is becoming more and more relevant in this story, it is not able to resolve anything. So you will say that multilateralism previously meant that the UN or the G20 was able to do something. But now it's just become a discussion forum with no real teeth. And basically everybody goes there, pats their back, everybody's happy, they enjoy, they get their gifts and they come back. And very simply, this means that multilateral institutions in a bilateral world is becoming more and more irrelevant. So in the conclusion, you will very simply argue that multilateralism is relevant as of right now. But it is very quickly losing its sheen, its importance, and very quickly becoming obsolete if these institutions are able to do something more than what they're doing as of right now. So you can't just say that it's totally irrelevant. You can't say it is very, very relevant, but you will just say that it's in between. It is not relevant also, but it is relevant also as of right now, but it is very quickly losing its basic importance. UN itself has become irrelevant. What does the UN do? All UNSC resolutions are blocked by the veto of any of the Security Council members. And every UN resolution, does anything have? Russia was condemned via UN resolution. Now what? It has no force. It is just a resolution. So multilateralism as of right now, India's opportunity as a G20 presidency is going to be nothing. It's all cosmetic. We will do something, we will bring everybody together. But the problem is that they don't want to work things out. G20 resolutions used to have a lot of force. But now G7 itself is useless. So if G7 is useless, then G20 is even more useless. I'm not saying that it's totally irrelevant, but very quickly they are losing their importance. Make sense, everybody? Okay, so let's take some questions if there are. See, the problem, Naresh, is that even if developed countries are the real problem. They don't have any direction. Developing countries still want something out of the G20. Developed countries are the ones who are impacted the most by all this politics. So very simply, G20 will not go anywhere because the core US itself is seeing the crisis. The EU has no answer. The NATO has no answer. Russia, Ukraine, everybody knows is the problem, but nobody is responding to it. Mohammed, what is the question? If somebody does not attend the meeting of G20, he's sick. I think really there's nothing. He's going to send a representative. The foreign minister goes. Opportunities for India as the presidentship just to show a lot of soft power, nothing more. Suguna, it starts as demand pull. Now it's become cost push. So basically it's more complex than these two only. Okay. So let's move to the last topic. Sinha Committee on MG Narega efficacy. So MG Narega, Mahatma Gandhi, I'm going to call it Narega. Mahatma Gandhi added later. Narega is National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. MG Narega is important for three very simple reasons. 100 days work within 1 year, guaranteed to any household, one adult for sure, if they want to work. So it is technically considered one of the biggest, and it is still the largest social security scheme in the world. And Narega is technically, it gives employment to people who want to look for it. But the problem of Narega are two things. That it impacts different states in a different way. And most of the time, the assets which are created are useless. What they do is, one season they dig a hole, next season they fill up that hole. Again, they will dig that hole, then fill up that hole. Dig a hole, fill up that hole. Dig a hole, fill up that hole. This is how they give that 100 days of employment. Same thing done every year. So now the question is coming for efficacy. Efficacy means that is MG Narega actually, or Narega, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act or scheme, actually even relevant in today's world? Because the asset quality is useless. the asset effectiveness is bad, and more than that, the cost of giving work is going up. And why is that? For example, Bihar, where there needs to be Manrega should be the most important. There is no asset creation, there is no employment. But in Kerala, which is a very good off state, they are creating assets also, and the most number of people are getting employment also. So efficacy means effectiveness. That is Manrega actually going to be effective? MG Narega is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. As I said, 100 days work it gives you, and gives you a minimum wage, a proper wage if to one household member for sure. Now, what is the Sinha Committee? So the Amarjit Sinha Committee has been established to check if actually Manrega works or Narega works. So for the purpose of the examination, two things are very important. First is Sinha Committee. Sinha Committee comes in the examination. Amarjit Sinha Committee established for what? So MG Narega. Second is what are the questions they are holding, because that becomes the question which can be asked in the examination. So the central government has constituted a committee to review the implementation of Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, especially to assess the program's efficacy as a poverty alleviation tool. So does it really work? Does it really? How effective it is to actually do anything in that sense. And the committee will be headed by former Rural Development Secretary and IAS officer, retired IAS officer Amarjit Sinha, to submit its suggestion in the next 3 months. So in the next 3 months, Amarjit Sinha is going to look at the efficacy. He's going to understand the importance. Why is it that it is important? And how to improve MG Narega. This is a very important point you need to understand. How can we improve Mahatma Gandhi Narega? Because it is important. It is relevant. 100 days work is very, very important. We also have a lot of data which shows that out of the pandemic, a lot of people recovered or were able to generate some income because of MG Narega. So it is important. It is important. But how effective it is as a tool is a question. So it's now high time we look at it as a concept of does it work or does it not work. This question should not be there. It should have it's working, how well it is working. So the question is how well is it working. So was passed in 2005, we know the MG Narega Act was passed in 2005. Guarantees 100 days work for unskilled work per year for every rural household that wants it. As of right now, there are 15.51 crore active workers enrolled in this scheme. And now the Sinha Committee will be questioning or studying factors behind the demand for MG Narega work, expenditure trends, and interstate variations. This is a very important point. Very simply, interstate variation is something which is becoming a problem, which is that the same scheme, same level of money is not producing same level of impact, which means that MG Narega or Narega needs to be in that way, fine-tuned in such a way that it is effective everywhere. So the composition of work, the interstate variation, all these questions are now becoming very, very relevant, very, very important in that sense. States like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, where there are higher level of poverty, it hasn't been able to work optimally. So basically, where there is a need for poverty alleviation, it's not working. In good off state, it's working better. So regional imbalance and regional inequality is not getting alleviated by a MG Narega. So Narega only works or is working only in a state which is well off, which is not the purpose of MG Narega. MG Narega needs to work in these states, but it's not working. So is it asset evaluation? Is it asset allocation? Is it the quality of work we are giving? These questions have never been asked till this point. So now, very simply, this is going to be the question which Sinha Committee is going to deal with and question. So, for example, Bihar despite its poverty level, does not generate enough work to make concrete difference. On the other hand, we have Kerala, which is economically better, but utilizes the asset creation very well. So this is the problem. Effectiveness of MG Narega on state to state basis shows that a blanket approach can't work. It has to be state to state. It needs to be fine tuned as per state. So present committee would look into the argument that cost of providing work is also increasing. So if it was easy, it was 10 rupees put in to find work. Now you have to put in 100 rupees. So the cost of giving the work is also increasing. So the critics of Narega have already been pointing out lack of tangible assets, same dig, fill it up, dig it up, fill it up, means that there's no quality of asset. And we need to now see, is the composition of work better or needs to be better? Review whether it should be community based or individual work. Now this is important. Assets which are generally created are community based, but community based assets are not being used. So should it be done for individual basis? Should the work be given for individual basis? So the questions in front of the Sinha committee are very significant. It is asking questions regards to effectiveness. It's asking questions with regards to asset utilization. It's asking questions with regards to quality of the asset. It's asking questions with regards to tangible asset creation. It's asking basis of community-based assets. Basically, if you look at it, the Sinha committee, as of right now, is very, very important committee because close to 16,000 crores goes into the scheme itself. So are we using that money effectively is equally important in that regard. Getting my point? Community-based asset would mean creating a step well, creating a tank, creating a park. These are community-based, public purposes. So it is a very important scheme in that sense. Can we look at the question? Last topic. Okay. The MG Narega scheme in the present context embodies the issue of regional disparity and inequality in India. This means that this question is a little bit complicated. Introduction, body, conclusion. Introduction, you have to talk about the scheme itself. It was launched in 2005, 100 days of unskilled work, every rural household who wants it. Now you've filled up the introduction. In the body, you need to talk about this Sinha report or Sinha committee. What is the questions in front of it? So we'll talk about the concept of Bihar and Kerala. Now, how do they embody? Embody means represent the issues of regional disparity and inequality. Because Manrega only works or Narega only works in areas which is well off. So if there is regional disparity or inequality, it is exaggerating it. It is exaggerating it rather than controlling it. So very simply, Bihar and Kerala are very good examples of showing that how the inequality in India, which is based on asset allocation, basic GDPs of the states, is getting even more exaggerated by asset creation in Kerala but not in Bihar. So therefore, the efficacy of the MG Narega is a question. In the conclusion, you talk about that the Sinha committee has a very important, most probably by the time you give this question or write this question, you would know what the Sinha committee said. So you add the recommendations of the Sinha committee also, and then conclude by saying that it's an important social security scheme. The question is not whether it works or does not work, it works. How well is it working is the important question in front of everyone. Done? Perfect. So with this, we end this session. Thank you. If you don't have a question, you can leave. But as I said, very simply, 5 important topics, very simply discussing the concept of aircraft carriers, MG Narega, we discussed the education sector, we discussed art and culture, and we discussed the concept of G20 being relevant or not, multilateralism is important or not important is also a question in front of everyone, right? So thank you, take care, and Happy New Year, because I will see you next year itself, a lot of you next year. So Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, have a great time, and good night. As I said, I will see you next year. Take care. Bye-bye.